Behind the RedLine, Episode 84. The Fire Island Jane Does. Fire Island and South Shore, Long Island, USA. Two unidentified women, a coastline built to forget. The ocean does not rush. It moves slowly, deliberately, as if it understands patience better than people ever will. Along the southern edge of Long Island, the Atlantic presses against dunes and marshland, reshaping the shoreline grain by grain. What is left here is never permanent. Footprints disappear, objects sink, time becomes an accomplice. Fire Island exists in this in-between space, a barrier island, a place people come to escape visibility, from cities, from responsibility, from routine. In summer, it is full of music and bodies. In winter, it empties into something hollow and watchful. Somewhere in this shifting geography, two women were left behind. They were not announced. They were not searched for loudly. They were not identified. They became known only as Jane Does, named not for who they were, but for where they were found. Long Island has always been about movement. Ferries, highways, seasonal residents, commuters, weekend escapes. People pass through without staying long enough to be known. This constant flow creates gaps. Social gaps, relational gaps, moments where someone can vanish without immediate consequence. By the 1990s and early 2000s, Long Island had quietly become part of a larger ecosystem tied to New York City's escorting and underground sex economies. Clients moved outward from the city. Women moved back and forth between boroughs, hotels, private homes, and coastal communities. This movement was rarely documented. Phones were limited. Online advertising was still crude. Safety systems were informal and dependent on trust. If something went wrong, there was no central place to report it. No single authority tracking who was supposed to arrive and who never did. This environment didn't create violence, but it made violence easier to hide. When the first woman was found near Fire Island, there was no dramatic reveal, no immediate media storm. Her body was already decomposed. The ocean and the elements had done their work. Identification was impossible without time, resources, and attention, all of which were limited. Investigators determined she was female, an adult, likely connected to sex work or escorting, based on contextual evidence and location. There were indications she had not been killed where she was found, suggesting transportation after death. But beyond that, there was nothing. No missing person report matched her. No fingerprints returned a name. No one came forward. She became Fire Island Jane Doe, a label that sounded temporary, but wasn't. Months turned into years. The case remained open, but quiet. Without a name, there was no family demanding answers, no photographs circulating online, no anniversary dates to mark publicly. The investigation existed in paperwork, not in urgency. This is how cases die without ever being closed. Not from lack of evidence, but from lack of attention. Years later, another body was found along the same coastal region. Again, decomposition. Again, no identification. Again, indicators pointing toward involvement in escorting or trafficking networks. This time, investigators noticed the similarities. Not enough to declare a serial killer. Not enough to trigger a task force, but enough to feel uneasy. 2 women. Same geography. Same invisibility. Still, the cases remained separate in official terms. Fragmented, isolated, unspoken. The Fire Island Jane Does were not random victims. They existed within a specific vulnerability window created by escorting and trafficking dynamics at the time. Women in these networks often lived without stable housing, legal protection, immediate family nearby, paper trails. Some were migrants. Some were estranged from families. Some used aliases for safety, aliases that later erased them. When they disappeared, there was no immediate alarm system. Predators notice this. They always do. Trafficking is often imagined as force and confinement. In reality, it is frequently quieter. It looks like dependency, like financial pressure, like someone else arranging your movement, your bookings, your transport. A ride offered becomes a trap. A job becomes leverage. A delay becomes disappearance. The Fire Island Jane does appear to have existed inside this gray zone, where autonomy and coercion blur, and where harm can occur without triggering law enforcement response. This is not accidental. It is structural. Fire Island and the surrounding coastline are ideal dumping grounds, not because they are dramatic, but because they are inconvenient. Remote access points, limited lighting, seasonal patrols, constant environmental erosion. Bodies left here are transformed quickly. Evidence washes away. Timelines collapse. Identification becomes exponentially harder with each passing tide. This landscape does not scream for attention. It absorbs. Without names, stories stall. Media relies on faces. Public pressure relies on identity. Justice relies on recognition. The Fire Island Jane Does had none of these advantages. They were framed implicitly as victims of lifestyle risk, not targeted violence. This framing doesn't require malice to be effective. It simply deprioritizes. Once a case is deprioritized, resources move elsewhere. Silence becomes policy. Years later, the discovery of multiple bodies along Gilgo Beach would force Long Island into the national spotlight. Suddenly, the conversation changed. Sex workers, dumping grounds, coastal isolation. The Fire Island Jane Does were quietly re-examined. Were they early victims? Were they connected? Or were they evidence of a longer-standing pattern of vulnerability that multiple offenders exploited? There are no definitive answers, only proximity, only echoes, only the sense that these women were not anomalies. Identification is not closure. but it is the beginning of accountability. Without names, families never stop searching. Patterns remain incomplete. Justice stays abstract. Advances in forensic genealogy offer hope, but hope requires sustained attention and funding. Jane Doe cases disappear because we let them. The Fire Island Jane Does were not erased by the ocean. They were erased by absence. Absence of protection. Absence of urgency. Absence of recognition. Behind the Red Line exists to hold space for cases like this, not because they are spectacular, but because they are quiet. And quiet is where violence survives the longest. Somewhere these women had names. Someone knew them. Someone loved them. Until those names are restored, the tide has not finished telling this story.